Anyway, there is one person viewing us live on Facebook, so welcome to you. And I am hopeful and confident that as we go on, there will be a few more people. So I'd like to welcome all of you on Facebook, but also welcome our friends who are joining us for this live discussion and perhaps lively discussion. First, Janice Poss, and welcome to you. Kathy Creighton, welcome. And Bob Durr, welcome. And Father John Crean, welcome.
Hello.
I'm a retired Roman Catholic priest, and he is a retired Episcopal priest. So, and how is the temperature out there in La Quinta?
Well, I have to quote scripture here, Tom. I hope you'll forgive me. But there is a scripture which says, "Many are cold, but few are frozen."
All right. So is it getting a little bit chilly out there?
Very, very. I went out to bring the garbage out this morning, so the garbage man had something to do, and it is cold.
Oh my!
Yeah, I can't imagine how cold the pool is. Fate worse than death, you know.
Yeah. So it went in 2 weeks. It went from in the hundreds to the 60s or 50s.
Yeah. In the morning, the low was 46.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it'll be 80s. It'll be back in the 80s in Claremont by the end of the week, I'm told.
But
the wind howled last night, didn't it, Janice?
Oh,
it
God.
did. It did. And during the day too. It's cold here.
Yeah, it's chilly.
53 here.
Wow.
There was a weather warning until 3 in the morning.
Really?
Yesterday. Yeah. Extreme. We get a lot of desert winds anyway.
Yeah. All my plants were blown over. Not all of them, but the tall ones were. And I had to go out and back and, do stuff to, hunker down my patio furniture. I mean, it was really, really serious.
Yeah.
For those of you on Facebook who are watching us, Kathy Creighton has just disabled her video.
Oh, sorry. I was doing something.
We hear her, but we don't see her yet.
You see my picture, right?
We have the official portrait.
It's just because I'm just doing something else. I'll undo it in a minute, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, anyway, what I had proposed for our discussion today to begin with, because I think it is a very, very important topic that's happening, and that is the Roman Church and the Vatican inaugurated last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, the Synod on Synodality. And this was going to be a 2-year preparatory process for a major meeting, hopefully not just of male church leaders, and hopefully it'll have an ecumenical dimension. But the beginning of it's called a synod, and synodality basically means walking together. It's not a discussion forum. It's not a focus group. It's not even a council. Certainly not a parliament or a congress. It's not a It's not a one-sided study session, but it is really an opportunity that we hope will successfully happen throughout the church, throughout the world, for people to begin to develop a sensitivity for the outlook of others, to walk together and to share in a way that, yes, discovers common ground and does not fight over differences or or become antagonistic towards personalities, but can say, let's walk together, let's go together. And so we may want to discuss among ourselves, the five of us, you know, as a beginning thing, because probably nobody here has read the documents yet on the synod. I have them, and I'll refer to them in the comments after the presentation. But we all probably have an understanding of the need and the hope for being able to communicate, perhaps in a new way, to overcome, as is often said, the duality of polarization that is so evident not only in Washington, D.C., but in so many areas of the world, and in our own relationships with other peoples and other countries, of a them and us polarity that, you know, so many of us just have the idea that everything would be okay if they all agreed with me. If they all see things the way I do, and you know, the road to peace is let's get rid of the people who don't agree with me. And I think that certainly much of the church leadership and our Holy Father, the Pope Francis, are saying there has to be a different way. Let's spend a couple of years experimenting with just how we can do this.
Yeah.
And every session of the Second Vatican Council began with a prayer. And that prayer in Latin was Ad Sumus Sancte Spiritus, or we are present, Holy Spirit. We stand before you. We come before you. And that prayer is also being used as the prayer for the synod. And I'd like to just call your attention to that. I'd like to make that our prayer to begin our sessions, and maybe, you know, maybe that could be a permanent thing. I don't know. One of the characteristics of this Coffee with Father Tom time has been it has been rather free flowing, and I try to make it, you know, not something that is overly prepared. So I'd like to share the screen with this prayer, if I can find it. I thought I had, there it is, okay. So here is the text of the screen. Perhaps we can all read it together.
Nice.
And those who are watching can join us. Stand before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather
together in your name.
With you alone,
to guide us.
Make
yourself at home in our hearts.
Teach us
the way we must go,
and how
we are to pursue it.
We are
weak and sinful. Do not let us promote order.
Do
not let ignorance lead us down the wrong path, nor partiality influence our actions.
Let us find
in you our unity,
so that
we may journey together in eternal life.
And
not stray
from the way of truth,
what is right.
All this
we ask of you,
who are
at work in every place and time,
in
the communion of the Father, Mother, and the Son,
Forever and ever.
Ever. Amen.
Amen. Nice. That's a great prayer.
It is. Should do it in Latin too.
Yeah, we must. Ad sumo sancte spiritus. They didn't put a comma after the ad sumus, which of course they should have, but we'll overlook that.
Originally, Latin did not have punctuation.
I know, but it's an evocative, so therefore it should have one. Sorry.
I love
you may be
punctuation
risking
geeks.
imposing English punctuational niceties on Latin. But,
right. We weren't walking along that road together, I guess.
Well, one of the it may perhaps be a characteristic of the path that it could be rocky and tortuous. It's not necessarily a straight, level, well-paved, shining path.
Yeah.
In fact, doesn't shining path have a little bit of a negative connotation? Isn't that kind of a communist slogan?
I don't know.
I don't either.
It could be. But when you were talking before, Tom, something occurred to me about walking along this road together thing. And those of us, or I shouldn't say of us, but anybody who'd want to sort of force their ideology on somebody else would be equivalently kicking the other person off the road, running them off the road, if it were, if we were in vehicular situation. And so there's no road rage. You could spin out a lot of stuff here. This synodal path is or synodal, I don't know how to pronounce it. Path is to be a path of polite traffic, and of giving the other person the right of way type of thing, and just the antithesis of road rage, if you will.
I'm going to stop sharing in just a moment, but there was one word on here, communion. What we are called to, and we Catholics have a bias here, because when we hear communion, we think of receiving communion or taking communion or giving communion or denying communion, meaning the sacrament of the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. And yet communion means an intense union, a union that transcends everything else, and that is active in affirming in love the other and receiving the affirmation of the other. That is the communion that exists in the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. That is the communion that we are called to. There's no such thing as sharing in the life of Christ or entering into the life of God alone. We are all joined together in that. So this whole idea of the synodal path is to enable us to look more closely, to discover the possibilities and maybe the opportunities of being like God to one another, relating to one another in something of the image of the Trinity, as at least to the extent it has been revealed to us. And I think we have to have the humility. Here's a little footnote. We have to have the humility that no matter how deeply we probe into revelation, there is an infinity of God beyond whatever we may understand of revelation. Even God shares according to the capabilities of the ones that God shares with. So, our vessels may be filled to the brim, but the mighty ocean is still, the mighty ocean of divinity is still out there that we simply cannot have a concept of. So that having been said, Janice, you have your...
Yeah, No, whenever I see that word communion, though, apart from, like you say, Tom, the sacramental meaning of it, but I always look at it because it has the word common in it. So it's almost like what do we have in common, rather than where are our conflicts and tensions and dialectics. So, I think if we keep that in mind, it's kind of an easy way to think about what you just said.
Mm-hmm. I very much agree, and the question will be over these next 3 years: how do we get to that?
Yeah.
How do we convert our own hearts so that in dialogue with others we may be able to lead to maybe a discernment, a mutual listening, a mutual looking at the same reality, and begin to maybe see the other person's point of view a little bit more clearly, and mutually act in accord with that. John, not John Green, but John Allen.
Okay.
I think we're all familiar with him.
Yeah, very good.
Who is probably the best commentator on the Vatican scene and the worldwide scene from the light of the Vatican.
Yeah.
Had a column in Crooks last week. I'll see if I can find it and I'll refer to it, which kind of basically, one of the things that he loves about living in Rome and covering the Vatican is eating. And
yeah.
And he says, something to the effect that in coming together in this synodal path, the most important thing might be bucatini alla matriciana, which he holds as the epitome of what good pasta should be. And he says that it when you're sharing a plate of bucatini alla matriciana, my Italian is very rusty. It's very, very difficult to engage in negative discourse.
What makes it so magic?
Well, probably John Allen's fantasy. But basically what he's saying is, and I think here we've got Jesus too. It's not by accident that he left us the sacrament of his real presence in the form of a meal. And that communion means when you join the meal, you put aside your differences. The differences are still there, but you put them aside. And you're engaged in a common activity, which is a mutually receptive activity, and rather clumsy and ungraceful if you actually look at the act of eating. But doing that mutually, you also begin to have something of a tolerance for the identity and integrity of the other.
One thing, Thomas, I found was wonderful that the Pope said, Pope Francis said, he says, I have never refused communion to anyone, meaning he didn't care whether they were Catholics or non-Catholics or whatever. He was not going to ask for a membership card at the altar rail, and which is very typically Jesuit in my own experience. They don't have any problem with that, but it's again the companion thing, the companus, of eating with somebody, sharing bread with somebody, which is. But can we do this on the synodal road? I mean, to what extent, in other words, will we be permitted to go back to some of the stuff that happened right after the council? And I experienced this myself, of sharing, celebrated with Roman priests left, right, and center. It was just no problem. And then suddenly that kept getting tightened up and tightened up and tightened up, legislated against, and going in that direction of non-communio, and so this type of thing. So I'm hoping that maybe walking along on this synodal path with Francis will bring us back to some of those initiatives where we weren't sticking our nose up and saying, you're not in full communion, blah, 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 this type of thing.
Yeah, that's, and I think that's going to be somewhat of a sticky thing, because there will be fights along the road.
Yeah. But I think that what's necessary, because I'm working now on this teaching certificate, of which I'm creating a syllabus for Vatican II, because in one of my Bible study classes, I realized that there are people that have been brought up in Vatican II that have no idea what the changes were and what it's about. And so I think we need a huge review of everything that's in there for everybody, because we're now 50, 60 years down the road and people have forgotten. So it's just kind of a renewal, which I'm hoping maybe the Synod will partially do to a degree, to bring all this stuff back up into focus so that it can be reviewed and looked at as, the guidepost for, say, the next 50 years.
Yeah, very, very definitely.
We dropped the ball somehow, and I say we in terms of the American church writ large. I think we dropped the ball after Vatican II. And I don't think it was dropped that way in Europe. My experience in Germany, for example. But we went, kind of off the charts and departed into a lot of stuff that was really not at all Vatican II. And the main teaching of Vatican II was never done. I mean, the catechesis of it was never really fleshed out in a meaningful way. It sort of went our little American individualistic way, and it devolved into absurdity. I mean, in regard to church music, and I would say liturgical deportment, the way clergy conducted the services, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to get back. I mean, Bishop Barron is very clear on how he was raised in this milieu. And, as a bright guy, as he started to study theology, found out, hey, we're way off the rails here. We're out in left field. And he's doing a great work in bringing it back. And Janice, you talked about the Vatican II documents. That volume that he published in his in the Word on Fire library, the complete documents of Vatican II, beautiful edition with all kinds of, the book is, if you don't have it, you should get it. It's absolutely marvelous.
Okay, I'll look.
He's got commentary in there from himself, other popes and bishops, and so on and so forth. But it's time to get back to really what was Vatican II.
Right.
And it certainly is not what the American church, how it was interpreted.
But not only what, but also why we had to have a Vatican II. I mean, I think that's just as important. Speaking of which, I have to ask John and Tom a question. I'm just curious. So I remember when I was very, very young that people received communion on the tongue. And I have noticed that at OLA, they're trying to bring back that in the midst of COVID, by the way, are trying to bring back that custom. And would a person be, I'm not going to do it, but would a person be holier if they received communion on the tongue? Or is the hands sufficient? I mean, I don't get that. And I think that, I guess my first response to when I'm observing this is that either people don't know, or they're trying. My father actually has done that too. When he was alive, when he would go for communion, he would take it on the tongue, because that was like how he did it back in the 40s and 50s, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't understand why we're doing that now, or why some people do that now.
It's a throwback to people thinking this is the more authentic church, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, it's part of the ad orientem crowd.
Uh-huh.
And I want to do it, you know, it's what I call a Walter, not an altar. It's a Walter.
Yeah.
This kind of gets back to the Latin Mass. People want to keep having that because we want to make sure we have the patent so that none of the crumbs come off and all kinds of ways of. But my point is that the Latin Mass, we thought was a great idea for us all to do English, but the Latin Mass was always a symbol of more than just the Latin Mass, as you know. That's Tom. I think that's what we're always going to be up against with this synod. That
Well, what else was the Latin Mass a symbol of?
That was my question.
Bob, you said it was a symbol of something more, but what else?
Oh, what the Latin Mass today, what it represents?
What it always represented.
Exclusivity.
It's being against all the things, the whole litany of things, against abortion, against gay stuff, the whole Pope list. They go crazy about that, and many times they throw in the Pope too. We don't like the Pope either because he's not conservative.
Okay, let's just take a look at that.
Okay, go ahead.
From maybe one step behind, I'd like to, and this might be one of the things that we need to do. You know, to look at those that we don't agree with a little bit more sympathetic eye, to be able to see where they are coming from, and maybe to see, do we share some common values there? One of the problems, which I think you pointed out, Bob, is when you look at the people who seem to be most vocal about the Latin Mass, there's a whole bunch of other things that they're very vocal and strong in their convictions of.
Okay.
The rigidity on certain moral issues, for example, the rigidity on certain political issues. And one of the things that I see when I'm looking at that, sadly, is we tend to have what I call ideological bundling.
Good point.
In other words, certain things are a litmus test,
right,
or that if you want, if you favor this, if you are in favor of this, that automatically means that you are in the camp that's in favor of all of these other things, and
right,
therefore opposed to all of these other things.
Right.
If you're in favor of that, you're automatically, seemingly, in the camp that's in favor of all kinds of other things. And you know, somehow or other, I think we do need to step back from that ideological bundling. They're bundles with certain labels, and the bundles end up being sort of left and right.
It's a simplistic viewpoint.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, just what you said, Tom, made me think, and what Bob was saying too, about this, you know, idea that, you know, you've got this and that and this rule and that rule, is the underlying root to this, I think, which people obviously aren't thinking of because they're in first Ricordian naivete, is this idea of wanting structure, wanting order, which Vatican II, I think, kind of threw everything in some kind of disorder and confusion and chaos that people haven't recovered from. And so they're looking for, you know, a new sense of order, because that is how we kind of try to run our, you know, direct our lives. And so it's this desire underneath for a more structured guidance or path that I think a lot of people, Vatican II did away with, and it didn't. It gave us a new order.
But that was never properly catechized. Excuse me, Kathy.
Right.
Yeah, and I wonder, because coming at it from the other end, because I was catechized as a young as a young child during the Synod, during the Vatican I, during the Vatican II thing, right? So, so I got some of the new ideas, but I also remember going to Mass, RCIC, um, which is the Rite of Christian Initiation for Children, um, where they spoke Latin and in our case, Spanish, right? So I have always tended to see it as being fairly exclusive, especially the Latin part. I mean, I understand the Spanish was the vernacular of the people, of most of the people who went there, right, or certainly a significant number of people. But the Latin, I mean, I have a real problem with that. And I wonder, does it also speak not only to ideological issues, but also to exclusivity? Because most of us don't know Latin. I'd love to learn Latin, actually. I'd love to take a class in Latin. But I don't know Latin as Latin in terms of being able to participate in the Mass. And I wonder if it's really and hand in hand with what you said, Tom, to really kind of screen people who are not the real deal. You know what I mean? And so and what goes with that is, no, I don't think my father was that way. I don't think that he was like, it was just that he went to Mass so infrequently, and there was a long period of time before he had, that he had, it was just what he was used to, right? But I just think for a lot of people, and maybe that's true for most people who want to receive communion on the tongue, but I just find it an odd practice, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
In 2021, that's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's always a bunch of Mass male altar servers. They got all these all guys. There's more guys, and when they do the genuflection, there's two guys holding out the vespers in the back. That's a nice touch.
Yeah.
It used to be because those were so damn heavy. I mean, the ecclesiastical brocade. And the poor priest couldn't elevate the host. He needed some help.
But I think the other thing that I've noticed is that we haven't had a full army of altar service since we've been back in church. But the ones that I've seen have all, well, except for one, that's not true. Except for one, have been boys. They haven't been girls. And I wonder what that's about. Maybe it's just that girls are not available. I don't know. But there was one girl.
Well, part of it is the realization that at OLA, as with many parishes, they are going to follow. I mean, what happens will be in accord with the pastor's preference. And that is an extremely clericalistic process. Clericalism is something that I think Pope Francis really is aiming to address in this synod process. That particularly there needs to be a way to encourage and facilitate those who are deaf to other voices to actually listen and share. And that's always going to be clumsy, and that's the problem. That is one problem. Not maybe the problem, but it's a problem. And maybe attempts like ourselves to begin to try to find common ground with those who don't agree with us.
Yeah.
Because and each one of us is coming from a different sort of perspective, even of our heritage. Whenever we talk about Latin in the church, I get kind of a little bit of a warm feeling, because what I realize is that the use of Latin is a way in our contemporary celebration that we can be in touch with the celebration of our heritage, we don't have to live in a museum, but it is good to have some works from our past in our present living environment.
Right. And I think something else we need to bring out, Tom, is the fact that, unless I'm mistaken, the original version of any of the liturgies is still composed to Latin and then translated into the vernaculars. Isn't that correct? And for example, at least in the revised liturgy of the Mass, etc., there is a Novus Ordo in Latin. I know that.
Yeah, yeah. Realistically, right now, they are composed in the language of whatever the person doing the composing or the leader of the committee does, and then it's translated into Latin for the promulgation to those who would then translate it. But
okay, but the authorized version, if you will, is that Latin translation, right?
Yeah, yeah. That is very true. Even though most of those are not, who are doing it are not sufficiently adept at Latin to be able to speak and write it without reference to whatever their own native language is.
Yeah, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that for the Roman Catholic Communion, which is worldwide, you have an authorized, version. We have something like that for the Book of Common Prayer with us. We have a custodian of the Book of Common Prayer, some guy who, keeps the thing under glass, which is the original translation. And it's important to say that exists for the Roman Communion, because that is still the universal language of the liturgical life of the Roman Catholic Church. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it doesn't militate against vernacular. It's in addition to, and it's there for reference.
Right.
Well, and the history on that is because Latin was spoken in Rome and then it evolved into Italian. So, it's the roots of the church and so to speak, historically, which we can't do anything about because it's there and that's where it began. So, it's just that historical connection.
But it's also linguistically, since it's a dead language, it's fixed and it doesn't, semantically, it doesn't wander. And so you have a fixed reference point, and that fixed reference, linguistic reference point, is important to have like an anchor, if you will, because the vernacular keep changing.
Well, and language is a living thing, and so it's not dead. And so I think that there's a tension there maybe too, where it's like do we need to have a dead language as our base?
I do think that's a question that needs to be continually asked, and I'm asking it from a somewhat different perspective. Is it good to have the artifacts from our past be part of the environment in which we live in the present? And I, what I see as problematic is that the Latin Mass people may well have been forced into their dedication to the Latin Mass by the furious anti-Latin sentiments of a very great many people during the implementation of the council, who, and I fought with a few people who were liturgists in the parish, who would have absolutely nothing. You can't do anything in Latin in the church, even if it's, even if it brings good memories of the heritage that we have. We have to transcend nostalgia there. Nostalgia is merely a feeling, but but it is good, I think, to be able to keep the artifacts that remind us of the spirit of where we have come from as part of our present. Otherwise, we do risk crumbling our own foundation.
Yeah.
And to bring
Well,
up,
and
go ahead, Jess.
no, I'm sorry. And, I mean, at least a Good Shepherd too. And I think in some of the other churches at certain times of the year, we bring back, like the Agnus Dei, like the, the Holy, Holy, Holy. And, there are parts of it that are done in Latin again. And, I mean, even Terry, we would do some Gregorian chant in the choir. So, there are opportunities to bring that in, which I think is kind of in the way you're saying, Tom, where it's not so much nostalgia as it is, looking, paying homage to our past.
Yeah, and a big part, I think, of what was not done and should have been done after the Second Vatican Council in the liturgical renewal, which I think was poorly handled and really rushed through. But to have as a big part of our catechesis a sort of a musical appreciation for chant and a bringing of chant type of music, whether in Latin or in English, into the liturgical life of the parish. But we were engaged in a somewhat destructive iconoclasm after Vatican II that destroyed our appreciation for our heritage.
Yeah, I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, they couldn't get rid of it fast enough. I heard a story that Cardinal Cushing of Boston said, what's with this Latin stuff? We're conducting this council of Latin. I'll pay for simultaneous translation like at the UN so we can get it in good old fashioned English. It was this anti-intellectual approach to the whole thing, which in my humble estimation, made a mess of the truth of Vatican II, the beauty of it. And thank God for Bishop Barron, who's bringing it back and who's recatechizing it and bringing it into for the truth that it was and that it is, and it is extremely important. The work of Vatican II, it was pioneering work, and it's accepted by the Universal Church. I mean, outside of Rome, I mean, we all follow it, we all refer to it, so it's time.
I'd like to finish with maybe one comment on. I haven't fully read the two synod documents that have been published, the general preparation and what they call the Vademecum, which is a handbook basically for, how should you conduct this? And I want to get familiar with that. But one of the things that I did notice is there is a subtle but pointed reference to the church being composed of all the baptized, that all the baptized are members of the body of Christ together on this synodal path. Now, how you deal with the differences of communion or adherence or structure, that's another question. But the synodal path does need to take into consideration that the one thing that unites us in all of our differences is that we are baptized. And my own theology would say baptized, confirmed, and part of the Eucharistic community, being at least ideally in union, if not always in practice in union. But that baptism does not make us super special in God's eyes. Baptism makes us missionaries delegated to bringing the love of God to the rest of the world. So that a key thing in this, the the synod phrase, which let's see, what communion, participation, and mission. Those are the 3 points that are part of the subtitle of the synod for a synodal church: communion, participation, and mission. And
beautiful.
So much of our understanding of Christianity is that we are the saved. Too bad about all the rest. Or
Vatican II.
what we are is we are the saving. We are participating in the life and the mission of Jesus Christ. With that having been said, should we bid goodbye to our friends on Facebook?
Just one thing I would say, I prefer spaghetti alla carbonara to bucatini.
And I have to confess, my favorite is angel hair pasta.
Okay. I only discovered bucatini kind of by accident because I saw it in a market. And I used it for carbonara. And this past weekend, I actually, for the first time in my life, made amatriciana with bucatini.
Wow.
And after I got over my annoyance that when you try to suck the strand into your mouth, you're breathing through the tube.
Wow.
What I like of bucatini is that it does seem to handle the sauce better. Now that may be just a very subjective sort of thing, or it may just be I read that and therefore I'm parroting what I read, which sometimes happens. But I really do, and I enjoy bucatini alla carbonara, which I have made, and bucatini alla matriciana, which I have made. And I just find, I don't know, to each his own. Angel hair has one.
Yes, by all means, don't use Fra Diavolo sauce.
Right. Unless you happen to be in a particular mood.
So I think one of these days we have to talk about current Netflix movies and things of this nature. I'd love us to get into the Lucifer series and then talk about this disastrous one that I just saw called Midnight Mass. So that might be a fun topic sometime, but we've got a lot more work to do on synodality.
Well, that's one of what I have to say. That's one of the topics that I will be very silent about because, quite frankly, I very seldom watch any of that. That's my own. I tend to feel that I have better things to do, but I definitely have other things to do, and I respect. I really do respect the people who follow and see many, many good things in those programs. That just is not part of my world, I'm afraid. Mea culpa.
No.
Okay.
So goodbye to our friends on Facebook on that happy note, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.